Hey guys, I'm Steve from Brothers, and over the last week our 64 C10 shop truck has developed a little bit of a problem. We kind of think it's the rag joint, so I thought this would be a great opportunity. We got to address this issue anyway. Might as well show you guys how to replace the rag joint. So what we've got here as a symptom is this thing is steering, but as you can see the wheel is not moving with the steering wheel. So I'm going to start tearing this apart. We'll get in there and get a look at that junction where the rag joint attaches to the steering box, see what our problems are. All right, and now that I'm in here, I can see that our rag joint connection's really loose. So what I'm gonna do is get a light, shine it in here, see if I can determine if it's the rag joint or the steering box. All right, well, now that I've got a little light up in here, I'm taking a look. There's a little gap here inside the clamp that clamps the rag joint, which is this piece here, to the steering box. And I can see through this little gap that the teeth on the steering box look a little rounded, but the rag joint appears to just be sliding around. So our next step is to get inside. We're going to have to drop the steering column down so that we can pull this rod back, give us some room to pull this whole joint back and slide this rag joint and the rest of the steering column off of the splines on the steering box. So we'll get that done right now. All right, now that everything's loose, the next thing we need to do is disconnect all the connections on the rag joint itself. Now, the rag joint has a couple of bolts here and here, and then we're gonna have to take this bolt loose, and that's gonna allow the collar to slide up. But these two will allow it to separate from the steering column itself. So let's get those out of there right now. And this one you're going to want to pull all the way out because while it's in there, it's actually touching on the steering box, and it's got a relief in there, and that kind of a safety feature keeps it from sliding back even if it does loosen up. All right, we've got those out. With any luck, we'll push the steering column back up, get enough room in here that we can slide the rag joint off of the steering box. This is going to take some effort to get the column out of the way. Maybe even a little coaxing because that thing's been on there for probably, I don't know, 15, 20, 30, maybe even as much as 50 years if it's a stock one. And so I'm going to go get myself a little penetrating lube, spray it on there, let it sit for a bit. We'll be right back. Okay, I've gotten my rag joint out, and I got the new rag joint here, and I can see that the teeth in the old rag joint inside this area here were kind of messed up. And I've inspected the steering box, and I got some teeth here that are a little rounded on there as well. But thing is, I'm comfortable with it. There's a lot of teeth that still have plenty of groove in them, and I'm comfortable that we're still in a safe spot with that. But if it had been any more worn than it is, I think we probably would have wanted to replace the steering box as well. But in this case, we're just going to go ahead and put a new rag joint in. Now, the one thing about the rag joint is we've got this flat spot here on the steering box input shaft, and we've got a similar flat spot inside the rag joint right here, and those two are going to line up, and that's going to help us keep the rag joint in the right spot. So I'm going to put a little penetrating lube on here so it slides on easy, and then tighten this up. Now I'm going to go ahead and make the connections. All right, well, we've got our rag joint back in, and I didn't show you all the struggle I went through. It was a little tricky, I'm not going to lie about that. It's difficult to get the steering column back up this far, even though I've got everything loosened and unbolted. You know, it's hard to get that clearance. So what I found was it was easiest to kind of attach the rag joint to the column itself first, and then using the slot where the clamp is, kind of push it over that nipple on the end of the steering box input shaft. And that's how I got it on. Lined it up with the flat joint on the input shaft, then tighten the bolt there, and then put these bolts back on. Everything's back together. There's no play in here. We're steering as the factory intended it to be. Now, most of the time, if you're going to be replacing your rag joint, typically you're not going to have what we had, which is where the inside of the rag joint stripped out. Typically what you're going to have is that this rubber cushion in here is going to tear, it's going to get old, and you're going to get some slop in there. Now, these pins and the bolts here are designed to keep you from losing your steering when that happens. But most of the time that's what you're going to be replacing it for at home. This job took us about an hour. Simple hand tools, ratchet set, and so forth. And really it's not that hard for you to do at home, and it's a nice safety measure to get your steering play out of there and to make sure that everything's working and in order. So thank you for watching. Don't forget to check us out on Facebook and Instagram, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel.